Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. This is episode 88, and Dennis E. Taylor's on the show today. Kevin, James, and Sam sit down with Dennis and have a great conversation about the Bobiverse books and other books of Dennis's. We did do an episode about We Are Legion, the first in the Bobiverse books, a year ago, so if you're interested in that one, go back and check it out. We're super happy to have Dennis on the show today. We hope you enjoy this one. Well, let's make our way over to the bridge.
All right, we're very happy to have Dennis E. Taylor here with us tonight. Dennis is a Canadian science fiction author of 9 published novels, including his very popular Bobiverse series. Dennis's latest book, called Earthside, is part of the Quantum Earth series, which explores the post-apocalyptic adventures of a group of college students gallivanting through dimensions. Also, the 5th Bobiverse book is currently being narrated for Audible and should be coming out soon. I don't know about you all, but I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. So, Dennis, thanks for being here and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So how are you doing?
Well, pretty good. We're doing Christmas decorations right now. So, boy, you know how that goes. Pull all the stuff out of storage, spread it all over the living room. Eventually it goes up on the walls.
What's Christmas decorations for you at your house?
Oh, honest to God, it just vomits Christmas all over the place. My wife and daughter love Christmas, and they just buy all the Christmas decorations you could possibly imagine.
So let's get into some discussions here about. I'd like to start out with the Bobiverse, if you're okay with that, Dennis. I know you've got some other stuff on the go as well, but I think we need to start out by talking about what is the Bobiverse for those listeners who are not familiar with it. Would you be interested in giving us a little background about your series and what it's all about?
Okay, the Bobiverse is about a guy named, strangely, Bob, who makes a lot of money and then on a lark signs up to get his head frozen if he, in case of death, one of these cryogenics things. And of course, he immediately dies because that's the way things work in books. He wakes up 100 years later, but things are not as expected. Instead of being revived as a corpsicle and having a new body grown, he's been uploaded into a computer. So he is now a replicant, not the same as an AI, but he's a recording of a human being. He's going to be used, or him or one of the other applicants are going to be used as the intelligence, the controlling intelligence for von Neumann probes to be sent out into the universe to look for habitable planets. The twist is that the United States is now a theocracy, and quite a stringent one. So that just complicates things for him. Anyway, this is like the first third of the book. Once he gets out into space, that's when things really start to happen, because as a von Neumann probe, he can make copies of himself. And his copies are not quite Bob. They're almost Bob, but there's what we call replicative drift in the series. So as the generations go on, Bob's become less Bob and more somebody else. Excuse me. By book 4, things really get weird. But it's a tech nerd's dream in terms of storyline, because Bob is a nerd and he's been given the chance to go out into space and explore. He's an introvert, so he's given the chance to be on his own. It appeals to a lot of science fiction fans, I think, just for those reasons.
Well, we actually reviewed We Are Legion, We Are Bob on this show earlier in the year, and we said those exact same words. This is a tech nerd's dream, or something very similar to that. It really, for me anyway, and I think for Sam as well, the two of us really enjoyed this book, and it was for all sorts of reasons. My background is computer science. I know yours is too, Dennis. And I don't think you have to have that background to really enjoy it, but for me, I really did. And just talk more about this von Neumann machine. Talk about that. Why is that such a relevant part of the book?
Well, John von Neumann, I think he was back in the 50s or something like that, proposed a device that would fly out into space, find local resources, make copies of itself, and then send those copies out. So it's an exponential search pattern where you're doubling your numbers and going out, and then doubling your numbers and going out, and doubling your numbers and going out. The calculation was you should be able to explore the entire galaxy in less than 1 million years or something like that. The problem with von Neumann probes has always been the controlling intelligence, because artificial intelligence has turned out to be one of the hardest problems that we've had to solve in the IT field or in the cybernetics field. So in my story, they get around the whole thing by just using a human mind.
And that, I think, is actually a really interesting concept, because when we think about AI or, general intelligence, we're usually always thinking about humans. And we think, as long as they're as good as us or better, then we have reached general intelligence, which is probably pretty too human focused. But if we actually are looking for a human-like AI, this is I think makes the most sense, right? For getting to the point of intelligence and super intelligence and conscious AI.
Yeah, and the other problem with AGIs is you create an AI and you hope that it's going to act in a reasonable manner. Perverse instantiations is what I was looking for. But basically, where an AI will do something that it thinks is logical, but will just horrify the people who created it. So if you use a human brain, or a human mind, you can be reasonably certain that it's going to act like a human being, and that when you say make people happy, it's going to try to make people happy, not paralyze their faces in permanent grins, which is the usual example given for perverse instantiations, right? Or wireheading people and forcing them to be permanently happy. So yeah, using a human being's mind, assuming that you have the technology to record it and play it with good fidelity, probably is the best solution.
Do we not, though, perhaps like when in uploading a human mind, encounter all the mental health issues that we encounter regularly with the human mind? Does sanity become an issue in that sort of thing, and how do you mitigate against that?
Well, in the case of the book, they had 5 or 6 candidates that they were evaluating for the position of von Neumann probe. And there was an additional problem in that people tended to go insane when placed in this position to begin with. I mean, it is, you have to admit, a little bit of an unusual position to be in. So yeah, they had a number of candidates, and whoever was sane at the end of it was was destined to be the probe.
And another thing is, if you're doing whole brain upload is, I think it was Nick Bostrom who talked about different types of superintelligence. And he said one of them was a quality superintelligence, where you can improve upon human cognition by deleting the bad stuff, right? So if we could do whole brain upload, maybe we could delete some of the old brainstem lizard brain stuff, and maybe we can improve our cognitive abilities, like be a bit more prefrontal cortex,
Maybe, but I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in doing that. The human mind is a product of millions of years of evolution, if not billions, depending on how you quantify it. It's a mess. It's a rat's nest of contingent connections and evolved solutions to problems and stuff like that. I would imagine that if you try to pull one thing out of that mind, it's just going to pull a whole bunch of threads with it, and probably end up unraveling the whole thing.
I agree.
As far as Bostrom's concerned, if you were going to do that, you'd be better off to just write an AI from the ground up with only the parts that you want. From Bostrom's book, a replicant, a human copy, is a speed superintelligence, but not a quality superintelligence, because Bob is faster than a human being, but he's still basically a person.
Right. And a parallel superintelligence, right? Because because he's got so many versions of himself, he can send computational tasks to different versions of himself.
He could, but that would be like a working group. Really, they don't. The Bobs don't communicate in any special way that human beings can't. they still have to talk to each other or send each other texts or whatever, although they do it a lot faster.
So what can you tell us about Not Till We Are Lost, the 5th book in the Bobiverse series?
Not a lot.
Okay.
Mostly because Audible doesn't want me to.
Oh.
But it's I think the recording's finished. I think Ray's done. I'm hoping it'll be out January or February.
Oh.
Probably more like February. There's a lot of post-processing that goes on at Audible, and I'm not sure exactly what's involved, but it does seem to involve a lot of work, even once Ray's done. So I don't know. The cover's done, the recording's done, the marketing's all been set up and so forth. We've got the blurb, the back cover blurb and everything ready. Just a matter of getting it up on the website.
For me, the Bobiverse made Audible for me. I was not a Audible book person or listening to books. Just it wasn't something I could get into. And the Bobiverse was the first one that said, "Oh, actually, this platform might actually work for me," and I could treat it like a podcaster in a way. Driving to and from work and listen to the Bobiverse. The only problem is that nothing else on Audible has quite measured up to Bobiverse on Audible. So I struggle with that platform a fair bit. But you have a sort of unique path that you found to publishing the Bobiverse. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it wasn't planned either. Actually, nothing about my writing career was planned. Everything just kind of happened. I managed to get an agent on the basis of We Are Legion, but he had a lot of trouble. Well, had a lot of trouble, and as in wasn't able to place it with any of the traditional publishers. The main problem being that for an unknown author, they're not willing to risk a trilogy or a series. Usually it has to be a standalone. So I guess they were reluctant to pick it up. But Steve Feldberg at Audible offered us a contract, and by that point, Ethan had tried all the traditional methods. So we signed with Audible. They published We Are Legion in the end of September 2015. And I distinctly remember Ethan saying to me, if you can sell 1,500 to 2,000 units, you can consider it a success. And we did that in the first 10 days. And it ended up being Audible's science fiction book of the year just because it took off so quickly. It was a total surprise to everybody. And after that, it was like a snowball running downhill. I just kept writing more, the second and third book, and they took off when they hit.
I think, and it's perfectly cast. Like I felt like you were reading the book to me in a way. Like and who's our reader on Bobiverse? Ray Porter,
and he's a prolific narrator, right? I think he's done over 400 books on Audible and many science fiction.
Yeah, he's a Shakespearean actor. He's a TV and movie actor. He's a voice actor. He's the voice of Darkseid in the Legion of Superheroes or movies, right? The Zack Snyder version, I should say, because the other one didn't have Darkseid in it. But he does a lot of Audible recording, and he is really good. He does voices for each character in the book, which a lot of other narrators don't really do. And he has fun with it.
He does. He also did Project Hail Mary and The Martian. And I thought that he did an excellent job on those as well. Really brought those characters to life in those books as well, among others, right? He's done so many.
I don't think he did The Martian.
Oh, he did not do The Martian. Okay.
No, he did Project Hail Mary, absolutely, because
okay.
A lot of my fans were complaining that they were listening to Project Hail Mary and hearing Bob, which was throwing them off. But no, who originally did Martian? It was another major narrator at Audible. Oh, Bray.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bray did it originally, but then they couldn't come to an agreement with him on the renewal, so they had to re-record it.
Oh.
And I think Will Wheaton did the re-recording.
Oh, okay. Okay. I heard you were thinking about Will for these books originally. Is that true?
Yeah, a part of it, of course, was he was the only narrator I knew,
Oh,
but I also knew him, like I'd heard of him for obvious reasons. And I was thinking, wow, well, of course he did Ready Player One, and I loved that book on Audible. So like, yeah, let's get Will Wheaton to do it. But Steve Feldberg made the decision basically that Ray Porter would be a much better fit because of Ray's range in terms of doing characters, because of the number of different Bobs in We Are Legion, and you had to give each one a different personality. So Ray was perfect for that.
mhm.
And in retrospect, great decision.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, Will's a great narrator as well, but I think Ray fits your books very well. Can I ask you now about the Quantum Earth series? And I think that I might come back to the Bobiverse as well, but this a lot of listeners may not be as familiar with these books. And Earthside just came out this year. Could you tell our listeners a bit about that series?
Well, Outland was actually the first book I wrote. And when I originally wrote it, I wasn't even really seriously thinking about being published. I was just trying my hand at writing a novel. And well, it didn't work out as well as We Are Legion initially, but it made me coffee money on Amazon. And I mean, Starbucks coffee money. But Outland is the story of a small group of university students who create an interdimensional portal by accident and discover other Earths. And one of the important ones is an Earth where humans never evolved. They're basically treating it like their own private Idaho kind of thing until the Yellowstone volcano explodes and makes things urgent all of a sudden. So they have to get themselves and as many other people as they can over to this other Earth just to save lives. And Yellowstone, of course, brings America and most of the world to its knees technologically and agriculturally and everything else. So they're forced to try and survive on in Outland, which is the alternate Earth with no human beings. It's basically a Pliocene environment, giant sloths and cave bears and saber-toothed tigers and all that stuff.
So when you get your own dimension to play around with, like what are I guess the barriers come off, right?
Well, the barriers come off, but then you have a whole lot of other problems to deal with too. One of the themes in my books is reflective of my own experience in real life, which is that there's never enough time to get everything done, or even to get half of what you want to get done. If you watch TV, the characters or movies or whatever, the characters are able to do incredible things in half an hour. There was an episode of Sliders, I remember. I don't know if you remember that series, but there was an episode where they created penicillin from scratch in a couple of days. And if you know anything about creating penicillin, that doesn't happen.
Mm.
So in my stories, my characters are up against not enough time, not enough resources, not enough people, too much to do. And it's, it's an IT version of hell is really what it is.
And just so our listeners know, Dennis is in front of a background of, as far as I can tell, the fiery pits of hell with demons coming out behind you. So it's
Tortured souls.
Is tortured souls. Okay, all right. Sorry, our listeners can't see it. It is pretty disturbing, actually. You want to tell us about that background?
That's my software team.
Oh, great.
They didn't make their deadline yet.
Well, it fits nicely into my next question, which is another theme that's between your two universes is it's a post-apocalyptic worlds, I think, right? And and I think that feeds into it's a bit of a narrative tool maybe that you can use to reset everything. So like an opportunity to figure out how to rebuild penicillin or bootstrap your von Neumann machine from nothing. Like, did you do that intentionally?
I'm not particularly wedded to post-apocalyptic stories as such, but they were a couple of interesting premises that I thought would be worth exploring. By no means are all my stories post-apocalyptic. Singularity Trap is not.
Okay.
Roadkill is not. The one I'm working on right now is not. But you always have to have, in any story, you have to have an inciting incident. You have to have a source of tension. You have to have, an antagonist, whether it's human or just the environment or whatever. It's just part of the narrative. You have to have something driving the characters.
Yeah, and it makes for a nice reset. Suddenly, all of the social supports around your characters are no longer there, and they're really on their own. And yeah, I personally love post-apocalyptic books because it just creates a really neat sense for what the characters have to surmount.
Hey, I wanted to jump in and sorry to I don't want to derail, but going back to what you were saying earlier, Dennis, about your first book and not really even intending necessarily to embark on this path of being a writer, but when you finished that book and you mentioned Amazon, and I know I have another friend who's gone that route as well too, but what was your process of being an unsigned writer, and how did you hustle? Did you go to bookstores and try to set up your table and, sell them that way? Or was it just upload that baby and hope for the best?
I'm far, far too lazy for that kind of stuff. I really am. As I said, I wasn't really seriously trying to become a published author. I just wanted to have the experience. I wanted to go through the process. So I wrote the book. I got somebody to make a cover for me. It was just somebody on one of the forums that I was on, and they did some merging and might even have been some plagiarized images in there. I don't know, but I think I paid them $100 or something, and then I uploaded it to Amazon for free. I actually started to get some sales. 20, 30, 40 units a month, and a couple of bucks a unit. It was, like I say, Starbucks money. But I did go through the website for looking for agents, for doing queries and stuff, query tracker. But I got no bites on the first one, and I think I did 50 or 60 agents, and then, oh well.
What did your family think of that process at the time? Was it just like, oh, this is just a nice little distraction for the moment, or did any of them see the potential that was emerging?
My wife was part of the reason why I did it in the first place. I was complaining about a book that I was reading that was really terrible, and she dared me to try to do one myself, and that got the ball rolling. But nobody at any point realized that it was ever going to get anywhere. When I did the second book, we had the Audible contract, and we knew it was going to be coming out September 20th, 2015 and stuff. And it came out and it was starting to sell. And my wife and I go on an 8K walk in our neighborhood. That's is quite a good walk because it's a lot of hills. And we do that for exercise, and we talk. And we were talking about, wouldn't it be great if We Are Legion really took off, and we actually made enough money to be able to pay down the visas and stuff like that. 6 months later, I bought her a car.
Yeah, that came
That's a good
quickly.
story. Yeah, that's great.
So I have a question for you related to the X Prize Foundation. I saw that you went to this Visioneering event. What's your association there?
Peter Diamandis is he's a We Are Legion fan. He's a Bobiverse fan. So part of his thing was he put together a science fiction authors advisory council as part of the Visioneering platform. And I guess the idea was to just have us come up with wacky new ideas for X Prizes. Anyway, he invited me there in 2018, and I went and had a lot of fun, and invited me again in 2023, and again went, had a lot of fun. But I got to tell you, I really feel out of my depth when I'm there. There are some crazy, crazy, smart, qualified, incredible people at those things. If you ever want to feel intimidated, that's the place to go.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Can you talk about any of the ideas that people came up with for prizes?
Yeah, actually, let me just pull up the email from Chris here. Okay, so the ideas that we ran, and this is just for the space and exploration group. I mean, there's a medical group, and there's an environmental group, and there's several other groups, each working on their own ideas. But sunshades in space, lunar Legos, which is finding a way to make construction materials on the moon. Metal near Earth object visit and demo, that was mine. Uh, ground-based fusion rocket demo, conservation by constellation, which that was a complicated one. Shields up, which is space shields. Point-to-point transport using space. It's essentially ballistic transportation, Earth point to Earth point. A Million Minds in Space, which was the idea of turning space into a kind of a video game, an interactive video game where you actually connect up with electronic and mechanical units in space and you're able to use them. It's a kind of it would intended to be a kind of way of bootstrapping interest. Surviving solar doomsday. I think that one's pretty obvious. Yeah, autonomous greenhouses, which actually turned out to be a project that was discussed at COP28 just a couple of weeks ago. So there's obviously some parallel thinking going on there. Hibernating humans and space solar power, which is basically beamed power from space.
Right.
And like I said, that was just our group. So we started out coming up with all these ideas. Then we had to cut them down to 10. Then we had to cut them down to 4. And then they had to be cut down to the top couple for the final round.
And the criteria is what? Is that this is plausible in the reasonable near term, or is the sky the limit here?
Well, the sky is the limit technically, but it has to be possible. It has to be plausible, but it also has to be a stretch. It can't just be a sort of kind of thing. It has to be something that forces people to. It has to be inspiring. It has to be motivating.
Well, it just sounds like a whole bunch of good plots for sci-fi books to me.
Well, it's sort of reverse engineering of that, really. I mean, you're taking a bunch of good science fiction plots and turning them into serious ideas, or trying to.
Hey, I just wanted to jump back to a Bobiverse theme that you had mentioned as well too earlier, and the notion of this being science fiction, and you mentioned it before, and about the United States had become a theocracy when Bob was reawakened, and not to poke any bears, but I'm curious if that was an intentional. Was that like a counterpoint that you were looking to make, that science versus the theocratic evolution of that country? Was it an extrapolation, or how did you arrive at that choice?
Well, it was definitely an extrapolation. I took a lot of abuse from readers, particularly American readers, for my choice antagonists, if you want to look at it that way. I actually had people write to me on Twitter and on my blog page and everything, tell me, that's ridiculous. That'll never happen. Why would you even suggest that? You should be using Muslims. Muslims are the obvious people to do that. That comment did not age well.
No.
Let me tell you. But in terms of why I did it, I wasn't trying to poke the bear. Really, I was just trying to come up with a plausible plot line. For purposes of my story, Bob had to be treated like property, right? We have all these debates about AI rights right now. If they become conscious, do they have rights? Is using them as tools a form of slavery? Stuff like that. So you can't have those complications in the story. So he has to be property. And the best way to do that is to have a government that believes in the literal existence of the soul. So no soul, no rights. Yeah, it just a lot of what ended up in We Are Legion just evolved in the process of trying to come up with a consistent storyline and avoid, massive logic holes.
Well, that issue of, do you have a soul? I mean, it's incongruent with whole brain uploads, or it flies in the face of, or something like that. There's actually a really interesting short story by an author, Quantum, QNTM. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he does things very differently. He'll publish early, and he'll get comments from his readers, and then he'll revise, and and maybe this is common, but I haven't seen it a lot. But he did this.
Well, Andy Weir did it.
Yeah, that's true. He did it as a series, right? Or as
The Martian
a
was
serial.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was very successful with that too. But this gentleman, Quantum, I don't even know his real name. He wrote this. It's like a manual page for those who know anything about programming. It's a description of how to use some type of a tool, and this tool was the upload of a person's personality who was uploaded 100 years in the past. And he's a very affable individual who can be used for all sorts of great tasks. And they talk about when he starts to get frustrated, and when you have to reset him, and at what point, what types of tasks you need to do to motivate him. And it's just super dystopian. Absolutely. And there's billions of copies of this person, and his name is Miguel. Anyway, it's a great article. If anybody's interested in it, it's called Lena, and it's on qntm.org. But I digress. Yeah.
Well, no, that goes right to the heart of the question. If you create an AGI, should it have rights? Does it have a soul? Even a metaphorical soul.
Yeah, the issue, the ethics of that is so obviously terrible. I think that we would have to legislate that pretty quickly to give some rights to those folks, in my opinion.
Yeah, because do you have to? Does the state have to recognize a soul? Right? Probably not. You just have to be self-aware, I guess, or like what's in your mind, Dennis? What's the threshold for assigning rights to a Bob?
Bob actually does have a whole soliloquy about this early on in We Are Legion, and I thought a lot about it before I wrote that part, and I think the biggest difference between a chat GPT or some other kind of tool that is just software and an actual conscious intelligence is an internal monologue. Bob discusses this with himself in the book when he's thinking about the Chinese room. And the way the Chinese room works, I don't know how much detail you want me to go in on this.
Explain it. Yeah.
Okay. The idea of the Chinese room is you've got a guy in a room, and he gets slipped pieces of paper through a slot. He looks at the piece of paper, he matches it up with, a bunch of indexed cards in front of him, and then he chooses the appropriate one and slides it out through the slot. And they call it a Chinese room because he doesn't read Chinese, which makes it, it makes it perfect in that he has no idea what he's doing. He has no idea what information is being requested or what information is going out. But if the indexed cards are set up properly, it'll pass the Turing test. It'll converse with the person outside the room in an intelligible and seemingly intelligent, conscious manner. And yet there's no intelligence there. The guy in the room has no idea what he's doing. Right? Now, the difference between a Chinese room and an actual conscious entity is that there's no internal monologue. There's no reflection. And obviously the guy is, but he's incidental to the process. When no questions are being asked, nothing's going on. It's a completely reactive system. If a chat GPT type system becomes conscious, it will have an internal monologue of some kind. It will be introspective. It'll think. It'll get bored. If you just leave it sitting there, it'll start to do stuff. It'll look around, it'll start to play with things. And I think that's the test. One of the tests that I do in one of my books is the inventor of utility robots places 10 of them in a room with TVs going. And every day he walks in with a baseball bat and smashes one of the robots to smithereens. And the remaining robots just sit there and they don't act worried. They don't attempt self-preservation. They don't attempt curiosity. They don't look at the TV. They don't do anything. Therefore, they are not conscious. And that's his test of consciousness.
The brutal test, but I guess effective. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a fascinating thing. If they can experience a sense of unhappiness or dread, or if they can be abused physically or emotionally, I think that's when our anthropomorphizing and our senses of empathy kind of kick in, and we would need to do something in terms of legislating.
We remember the movie, I think it was called Number 5. It was about a robot that gets hit by lightning and becomes conscious. And the technicians are going to take them apart. And he goes, "No hurt eye, no hurt eye." And that was it. That was the evidence of consciousness, the self-preservation instinct.
Yeah, agreed.
So I'm just going to continue on that thread a little bit and look for your sort of personal philosophy. I'm not a computer programmer. I don't have computer knowledge beyond what we're doing right now. But Dennis, how do you feel? Do you think looking forward, we're ever going to get to that point that these are questions we're legitimately going to have to grapple with, or is it just a bit of a thought experiment because we're on the sort of precipice and it looks like we could get there?
Well, I definitely think it's going to happen. And I think it's going to happen fairly soon. And the reason I think it's going to happen is that IBM has just been working on something called a North Pole chip, which reverses the concepts around a computer. And I think that's what's necessary in order to make real AI happen. The way a computer works, you have a CPU that is active, that does all the work, and you have memory that's just passive and it just sits there and it holds values until the CPU decides to do something with them. But the way brains work is exactly the opposite. Each memory location is active. It has processing power of its own. They're called cortical columns in some literature, and they actually have a fair bit of intelligence in each memory location. And in this scenario, the CPU becomes nothing more than an orchestra conductor. It sets the timing and it sort of points and says, "Okay, you start working," or "You start working." But it's the memory that's more active, and that's what IBM's North Pole chip does. It is active computational memory, and I think that's what's going to help create AI, and probably within the next 10 years.
And is that because it's just simply a more efficient architecture for AI?
It's beyond more efficient. I think it's the only possible architecture to make real AI work. Otherwise, you're just emulating AI. Neural nets are just an emulation, and it's an NP complete problem. The bigger you try to make the brain, the heavier the processing requirements, and they go up exponentially. And if we ever tried to even emulate a mouse brain, you're talking supercomputers. You try to get to a dog's brain, and you're talking about a computer half the size of the United States. It's just not feasible working that way.
Cool. I'm gonna look into that.
So let me ask, just to follow up, because I'm going to poke this bear as well too. How about philosophically? Do you think this is something we should be pursuing, or is it just an unavoidable consequence of progress?
I think it's unavoidable. It's one of those situations where telling people that man was not meant to yada 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 is just asking for trouble. That's just presenting people a challenge. Like, oh yeah, watch me. It's going to happen. It would be nice if it didn't. It would be nice if we stopped with non-conscious AIs, but I don't think that's realistic.
So when that happens, is that simulation going to be within a simulation? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. That,
Sorry, I had to ask.
yeah, there are some aspects to the universe that that do make people think maybe we are. Quantum mechanics in particular sounds like the type of thing that you get when you don't want your computer calculating at the smallest levels, and at some point you just start saying, "Oh, start making guesses."
I was thinking when we were talking about whole brain uploads as being part of the von Neumann machine and having that human ethic as part of that, it solves a real problem with the von Neumann machine ethos or the inevitability of what would happen with von Neumann machines, which is the gray goo problem. And I don't know if our listeners are familiar with the gray goo problem, but this is the idea that if you've got any nanotechnology or anything that's self-replicating, it's just it's possible that it might just try to change everything into being itself, and the universe could become just a gray goo. But I feel like if we have Bob, who has his sense of human ethics, it solves the von Neumann machine gray goo problem. I don't know if you thought about that at all, Dennis, or
Yeah, that's what I was saying before about perverse instantiations. With human intelligence, you don't get the paperclip problem. The paperclip problem is where you tell an AI to maximize paperclip production, and it starts turning everything into paperclips, including people, including the Earth, including Mars, and so on and so forth. Because it doesn't occur to you to set limits, and it doesn't occur to it to set limits.
right.
The human being already understands limits.
It sounds like you're trying to get on the good side of AI before it does things do get ugly.
Yes, I want to be the first to welcome our new mechanical overlords.
Wise self-preservation
Mm-hmm.
into the future.
And for the AI's benefit, I couldn't agree more, Dennis, with your premise. And I'm glad to see this book being written.
We love AI.
Yes, do.
More AI, please.
Thank you so much for joining us on The Bridge today. We really appreciate you. If you have not followed or left a review to let us know what you think of the show, please do so. We would love to hear from you, as always. Thank you, Kevin, Sam, and James. Great conversation. Thank you so much, Dennis. We love the books. Can't wait for the new Bobiverse book. Go check it out if you haven't already. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time.